All right. Good afternoon, LinkedIn. So excited to be presenting our second panel discussion of the year with these three amazing change makers, all from the Nonprofit Hive community. And we're going to be talking about hustle culture in the nonprofit world, which I don't think for people outside of nonprofit, they don't associate hustle with nonprofit. But I think for many of those of us in the sector, very much can feel very hustle culture-ish. So super excited to introduce you to our three panelists today. For people who would like to throw in the comments, say hi, where you're listening in from, join us. Super excited. And I'm going to let our wonderful speakers give a quick introduction about their background and experience in the nonprofit world. So Jemima, I'm going to start with you today.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Tasha. It's so great to be here. I'm really excited to be part of this conversation. My name is Jemima Attanasio. I'm the Senior Director of Development for Fordham College Rose Hill, one of our campuses here at Fordham University. I have been here in the States for 20 years, worked in fundraising for the arts, for education through K through 12, all the way up through higher ed and graduate education. So I've been in the nonprofit space across a couple of different parts of the industry. And I was in events too, which is one of the places that we really do think about the hustle culture and getting all those deadlines and things done. So excited to be a part of that, and then talk about major gifts work, which is what I do currently.
Amazing. Andrew, can you please introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit as founder of an amazing nonprofit.
Well, thank you. Great to be here. Thanks for the invitation for creating the event. I'm Andrew Grant Thomas. I'm a co-founder, and co-director of an organization called EmbraceRace. We're a small but national nonprofit trying to help caregivers, meaning parent educators, and many others support the kids in their lives to be thoughtful, informed, and brave about race. As we say, we've been around since 2016, and definitely take seriously sort of the expression of the values that we profess with respect to our public-facing work, that those be expressed as well internally. So by no means have nearly all the answers, but happy to share what we've found.
Amazing. And Sebastian, introduce yourself, please.
All right. Good morning, everybody. I'm Sebastian Africano. I'm the Executive Director of Trees, Water, and People in Fort Collins, Colorado. We're turning 27 this year. I've been with the organization for 20 years this month. And yeah, we've done a lot of cool investments in and focus on culture as a lever to sustainability. And so this is an interesting conversation because sometimes it requires hustle. And sometimes it requires a lot of stepping back and just kind of watching things unfold as we are right now in the U.S. So yeah, really excited for the conversation.
This is great. And I mean, one of our longtime Hive members, Emily, hi, totally relevant. And we were just saying this behind the scenes before we started. But, for anyone today in the U.S., lots of distracting news, lots of, political events worldwide too. Like this doesn't just apply to the U.S., but there's a lot of shifts in the nonprofit world that I think affect our ability to look at hustle. What does it mean to hustle? What does it also mean to be sustainable? And what can we do for our teams? We're always at the Nonprofit Hive kind of looking from the inside out, right? Like looking more at the individuals within organizations has always been kind of our rallying cry, nonprofit work. So this is very relevant today. Super excited to start this conversation. And we're going to kick it off first. Sebastian, I'm going to throw this question to you first. What does a sustainable, people-centered culture look like? What could this look like? What does it maybe look like for Trees, Water, People?
Yeah, so just a little background. We're a 16-person organization. We're very diverse. We have a lot of staff from the places that we work and that have contextual lived experience in the places that we work. We think that makes us a better organization, better at what we do, and better at serving our communities. We move at the speed of our relationships, and I think that what we've been successful at in the past several years is taking that message to our donors and really kind of rewiring our relationships with donors into a more trust-based, relationship-based, and community-led approach that allows us to kind of take time for these critical relationships to develop and unfold, right? We can't do anything effectively if we're marching to the donors beat and outpacing the communities and the relationships that are critical to getting any meaningful work done, right? And so a lot of our work has been around trust-based philanthropy and kind of beating on that drum as kind of a lever for improving well-being of staff, improving relationships with the community, and ultimately leading to greater impact, right? Lasting impact that won't create dependencies on your organization, but will leave a lot of the power and a lot of the decision making in the hands of the community. We work with indigenous communities in the West, in the Western U.S., and also throughout Mexico, Central America, including Honduras, El Salvador, and Guatemala. And we've learned that it all takes time, and longevity makes a difference, right? And so the longer that you have relationships with people in communities that are really working on generations-old challenges and generations-old issues, and looking generations into the future about the results and the impact that they want to create for their grandchildren and great-grandchildren, the more you realize that, as you're setting up these programs, it's not about hitting those quarterly marks. It's not about meeting the grant goals of the foundation that's only looking a year ahead in their grant cycles. Really, it's about communicating to those funders and to your staff to think on a long-term, long-horizon basis, and really look to the communities for what they need to create the change that they need to see to feel successful, and to feel like they've created impact for their people to come.
I love that. That's fantastic. But even the forward thinking piece, because I think so much of nonprofit that I've seen and individuals talk feels we have to be very reactive because emergencies happen, right? I was just talking to a member this morning, Courtney, and he was very much highlighting the reactivity of this sector when emergencies arise. And that is a part of it. But how can we plan for the reactivity, but plan also for the future at the same time? I think is a real challenge when resources can often be limited, right? Jemima, what would you add to this question for people-centered work?
I think it's a great question. I think we are a very different kind of organization, institution. We're over 175 years old. Fordham University was founded in 1841 here in New York City. We're positioned in the community, part of the community. So what Sebastian was saying about thinking about what our community needs and wants around us is very much student-centered. Our students, undergraduates, are nearly 10,000 strong here. We have lots of graduate programs as well. So I think we're about 16,000 as a university, and then we have nearly 200,000 alumni, mostly in this tri-state area here around New York, but across the country too, and obviously internationally, alums who live abroad as well. So when we're thinking about how we kind of think about our community and keep that as a people-centered kind of community, it's about communication, it's about being open. We're a Catholic Jesuit university and very much mission and value driven that way as well. And that is a really strong part of building that community, both inside and externally. One of the things that we've been doing, because like all nonprofit cultures, we've had lots of turnover over the course of the pandemic, and before that, we're naturally very like a lot of offices that have staff turnover in the development office. We've been doing lots of work in the last couple of years since we've come back mostly in person again to really connect each other in the office and do work together that is both joint learning about the university. So we'll hear from faculty members or program directors, others in the community who come to speak to us. They get introduced to all of us together, and we have a sort of lunch and learn. We do those sorts of activities that keeps us in a place where we're people-centered to the programs, obviously what's happening, but what we're able to say is we know the people who are running these programs too. And then within our office, within our development team, we're a larger team. We're over 100 people. So getting to know new members. We have We have, teams of people. We have actually launched this year something called the Sunshine Committee, which I've shared on LinkedIn before in our sort of team here at the development team in Fordham, and that helps us kind of bring together different kinds of events around the office, whether it's a craft project or we go on walks locally out in New York, in Central Park, or other initiatives that just help us bring us together so that people-centered perspective is there as well. I think the sustainability piece comes from being a big institution. We have resources that other places don't. So we're able to think ahead more broadly because of that. But we are a particularly well centralized university, despite the fact we have 2 campuses and actually 3 or 4 we have a campus in London. We have a center for environmental studies upstate New York. We've got a lot of centralized roles and resources and offices, so that helps us keep that sustainability and longer planning going forward too. We've always got better things to do, and I think that's why these conversations are so great, because they help us hear each other and help us understand how some of those things can come together.
One thing you pointed out, and I've heard this, it's a more common thing talked about in for-profit marketing, but you should always be marketing to your own team, right? And I think that's something in nonprofit, that marketing is a little bit of an afterthought sometimes in nonprofit. In general, it's like the last thing on the list. But that piece you talked about programs and having people present, and we should be marketing, right, to our own teams, because I think that helps with that value piece that you were talking about, Jemima, like the values of Fordham. What does it mean to be working here? What are our values? I think broadly that gets projected outwards at a lot of nonprofits.
We're our best ambassadors. If it's a good place to work, we're the best ambassadors to go out there and say. And even those who, I'm connected to a lot of people. I've been here 2 years. I'm connected to a lot of people who either worked here 20 years ago, or those who have left and moved on to other positions, and still stay in touch. We're reaching out in the community. Fordham is a place that they can talk about because it was somewhere good for them to work too.
I love that. Andrew, for the group of you, as a co-founder, you're the heart of, I think, often what it means to have a nonprofit workplace culture. What does that look like at EmbraceRace?
Yeah, well, certainly we are the toddler of the group, both in terms of age and size, right? So we, as I said, were born, as it were, in 2016. We have 7 full-time people. We have, a number of consultants, and both Sebastian's and Jemima's organizations are largely place-based, right? Although clearly you cover a lot of space, it sounds like, in your geographies, but whereas we're national, our team is also virtual, right? So those 7 people are in 5 different locations. Certainly the consultants, including the person who introduced me to the Nonprofit Hive, but has been here. His organization has been with us longer than any staff member we have, except for Melissa and me, my wife, who's my co-director and co-founder. Anyway, so these are, it's certainly important. And I was really struck by this, thinking about this event, to take context into account, right? And the very, very different circumstances in which we do our work. With respect to work culture and promoting, a sustainable, people-centered one, gosh, we could have an amazing conversation just about what it means to be people-centered. Let me follow Jemima's lead a bit and talk about some very specific things, right? There's obviously a big picture, you can talk about policies and so on. And then there's some, really sort of tactical practices where it really plays out, I think. And so one thing that, for us, one example of that for us that's really supported our efforts at developing the culture we want is what we call clearings, right? So we have staff meetings every week, and actually I'll mention 2 things. One, we start with what we call water cooler, right? So we're not in person, right? So that is in an in-person organization, you might meet at the water cooler, right? And have some small conversation. That's really helpful, right? That really helps knit the fabric of the community you have there. We can't do that because we're all in different places. So we literally schedule in water cooler time, right? And doing that not only means, yes, it's, we were more likely to do it, but it really says this is a value for us. And the value is about, we share. We share what's going on. We know, if someone had, someone's child had some big event yesterday. And so that's an opportunity to follow up on it with full permission from all of us to do that. Another thing, maybe even more wonderful is what we call clearings, right? So the idea is, yes, we are full human beings, and we have work to do, but we also, things happen in our lives that are not work related that affect how we're thinking, what our moods are, our ability to perform our jobs. So clearings is a 3-minute, recurring feature of our staff meetings, where we say these 3 minutes, you can stay silent. And often they go with no one saying anything. But even then, it's a nice bridge between whatever came before and what comes next, right? Just have those 3 minutes of silence, if that's what it is. But it's also an opportunity to say, to introduce something into that silence and say, look, this is going on. And you can be, you can say more or less. No one speaks in response to it, right? But it's just a way of saying, gosh, something perhaps is weighing on my heart today, right? I'm really thinking hard about this thing that I just read in the news, and I'm asking for your grace, right, today, and how I do my work. So, and the last thing I'll say, there are a number of things like that, but I think, Jemima, you mentioned lunch and learns, right? We also do those, and they can take any number of forms, including outside speakers, but quite often they're led by us. Right. And so it's an opportunity for, my Pakistani American colleague, right, to talk about, the circumstances of her coming to this country, what it means to be distant from her parents who are aging. It's an opportunity for my DACA recipient colleague, to talk about what her experience has been in this country and what it means now. She's also from Chicago, which is ground zero, right, for ICE efforts. So anyway, we essentially, we try to make real space for people to show up as they are.
I love that, because I think the fallacy that there was like work and life, and I don't even like the term work-life balance. It's work-life integration, I think, for many of us at this point, right? And how do we find that? And I think great workplaces, in many ways, Sebastian, being at the same org for 20 years is an oddity in this sector, right? But that speaks often to me when I hear from people who are like, I've been at the same place, and and people do leave for reasons of growth and opportunities and everything as well. But, often it's a signifier in this sector, that there's usually something pretty positive happening there. I love this. Megan Whitney, I don't know if any of you three have connected with Megan. She often talks about minute to arrive, and like very similar to this clearings concept you're talking about, Andrew. Fantastic. 3 minutes well spent, right? Like, I run from meeting to meeting. I am horrible for this. I will absolutely own it, to go, I should really recenter. And what would that bring back to culture? I love this. Jemima, I'm going to push this one over to you first, because super excited. And this is, I know, a tough conversation. We're not trying to like hone in on the burnout, but I think it is something worth addressing. What do your teams do to help with that, move us out of hustle and burnout potential set?
A big topic for me. And Tasha, you and I have chatted through this. I've shared a little bit, in various posts. I've seen my fair share of it. Unlike the others on this call, and I moved around. This is my 8th position, 8th institution in the 20 years I've been working. So all exactly what you said, different opportunities, new places to be. I worked for my own alma mater. I've worked for arts and education. And so I understand how it is to leave an organization, what it's like to arrive and be new at an organization and build that trust again and build, all of those pieces. Burnout is, multifaceted too. And would be always very happy to connect with anybody who wants to talk more about it. It can come from multiple different areas, but I think within the workspace, it is the sense of, kind of how do you show up? How are you showing up to what you do? And I've realized in the way that I've been part of, how it sort of affected me is sometimes I have to move away from it to come back to it. So for me, easy things like taking a walk at lunchtime. I've done that nearly anywhere I've been and nearly everywhere I've been. I try to take a walk at some point during the day. I'm here with Sebastian, who has trees as part of his mission, and getting out there, out of the office, out of this space, out of a box that I have no window, being amongst nature, and then whether it's the noise of the city or something else, it's a really great reset moment every day. One that I've really, and I'm clinging to this year for myself, is eat first. And I think a lot of meetings that you just mentioned, Tasha, you'll come into a meeting and you're rushing and you're late and you forgot to eat, or you didn't, or you brought your lunch with you, because that's, at our lunch and learns, we have 10 minutes at the beginning where everyone's just eating. We don't like plunge right in. People arrive, they get their food, they sit, they chat for a few minutes. There's not a kind of like, right, it's an hour, we've got everybody, let's go, get started, we haven't got time. It's definitely a sense of sharing a space together, and that has been really important. But I think personally, knowing yourself, whether it's coffee, whether it's food, what it is that enables you to show up in the best way you can, is a big, not burnout prevention, but it's a burnout, kind of resilience when you know where it's come from before. So those are just a couple of things. Patience is one of the big ones too, but I'll throw that out there too.
No, that's fantastic. And, Dan, who's in the chat, longtime Hive member as well, just talking about, there's also a piece of it that when the values of the organization internally, and maybe it's it sounds really simple, we prioritize lunch, but that's a real thing, right? Like when you've worked at places where they're like, no, we got to get this done, we're all pushing through right now, that shows what the values are as well. And it's one thing if maybe it has to happen once, but if that's a frequent theme, I think we do start to internalize that, right? And it can really affect culture. What would you add to this in terms of strategies as well? Andrew, you already highlighted some beautiful things your team is doing to kind of prioritize each other, but that burnout, that hustle that we often are doing, what is your team have
for sure? Well, like Jemima, I'm going to start with lunch. So this is actually a thing we're not very good at, right? So we're 7 people across several time zones. And because we're virtual, we meet a lot, right? I mean, we're very collaborative. We like to talk to each other. We like each other, all those good things. So yeah, it's actually not easy, right, to ensure, and it has to be sort of restated and reinforced. Look, make time for lunch, right? Because again, right, and I'm the biggest culprit in not making time for my own lunch, right? Because I'm accepting meetings, and it's like, no, don't do that. And so just reminding people. So for sure, lunch, and certainly things like, yes, flexible schedules, which I know the standard thing for many places, but maybe not enough. It's things like, we're not going to send, and you certainly don't have to respond to emails and Slack, which is a main sort of communication vehicle for us after hours and on weekends. We're not going to do that. 40 hours a week. When people come in, we say, look, this is a 40-hour-a-week job. It is not a 45-hour-a-week job. Of course, for sure, there will be rare occasions. And if they ever become, more than rare, more frequent than, let us know, right? We need to adjust that. But this is a 40-hour-a-week job for real. So, and then, of course, there's, really setting the tone. And for us, that means in the inboarding process, right? So I think of a former employee, wonderful guy, who, came in, had a relatively senior position, and early in his second week, I was his supervisor, and he came to a one-on-one meeting with, like charts and grids of what he wanted to accomplish, right? The following Tuesday, and then I'm like, dude. I mean, I love the energy. I love the, do what you need to do to organize yourself, but please don't think that you need to be producing in your second week and third week. Like, no, let's be, and that actually led us to be more explicit about expectations and goals for the onboarding period, which for us are typically 3 months long. It's not to say that there's work to be done, right? Sort of, recognizable, productivity that can happen. But, please know that, we are also, genuinely interested in the human being. And generally, Sebastian, you talked about relationships and the power of relationships. We believe that, both in our external work and internally. So there needs to be time, right, spent on build and support for building relationships and all of these sorts of things. So I guess sending that signal, as it were, from the top, right, from Melissa and me, demonstrating that, making space, giving people assurance that it's not just about, what have you done for me in terms of your job description lately. All of that, I think, is quite important.
Love that. Sebastian, what would you add to this? Because, you've been at the same space for quite some time, right? So how do you handle the risk, I guess, of burnout, or how is your organization focused on prevention?
And happy 20th anniversary, Sebastian. Coming
That's
up.
Huge. Thank you. No, it's this week, actually. I landed in Honduras 20 years ago today as an intern for this organization. But, burnout happens, right? And I've lost a lot of great people to burnout in the past, and we've put in a lot of measures to try and prevent it. It happens when there's loss of clarity. It happens during times of growth. Organizations go through different stages. And sometimes, I think that, in answer to the previous question, I think sustainability a lot of the times comes from revenue and getting to a revenue base where you're controlling for some of the external pressures that cause burnout, financial woes or difficulties and challenges, or not being able to keep up with, your rent, cost of living, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So to the extent that we can help reduce those pressures, I think that that's a valuable role that we can play, but that requires growing the organization, growing the revenue, and making sure that everyone's getting paid a living wage. But we've really done an intentional job of making sure that our staff are considered stakeholders, right? And they're on equal footing with the communities we serve and also our donors, right? And so leveling that playing field and going back to the trust-based philanthropy conversation of just like, listen, we're all partners. We can work together on this, and we need space to focus on the impact that we're trying to create, not serving the people who fund the work. And so can we agree, and I think COVID had a lot to do with this, where funders were equally disoriented and discombobulated and shifting their strategies and approaches. We said, we're not going to be able to accomplish everything that we set out in the timetables and everything that we agreed to, because we're going through the global pandemic. Everyone's working from home, and we're just trying to survive and keep our communities healthy and supported. Can we work in a different way and just agree on the objectives we're trying to achieve together and work together as partners and kind of level out that power dynamic, right? And that's been really effective for us. Other things is just well-being. We adopted just kind of need time off, take time off, well before the pandemic, where we stopped counting hours, vacation hours and accruals. We just started seeing people that would, be burning themselves out, saving up for that one vacation they got per year. And, were stressed when they left and stressed when they came back, and it just wasn't working for anybody. So, we have a very flexible work culture. We're hybrid. We have employees in Honduras and Guatemala, New Mexico, in Hawaii and other places. And, sometimes we're working 12-hour days. When we work in the field with our community partners, we're working weekends. We're there for them, right, and engaged in the work. And so, when you need that time off to kind of recover from those things, take it, right? We also, like I said, employ a lot of people from diverse backgrounds culturally and geographically. So take time to go see your family. Take time to take care of your people and stay connected. Take time for cultural events. We have several Indigenous employees that go back for ceremony, that go back for cultural responsibilities, that go back for cultural outings and events with their family members. Like I'm not going to count that against you. Why do we penalize each other in work culture for taking time for yourself? If I'm thinking the long game, people have to have that endurance to sustain those long-term objectives, right? And so if I can help do that by reducing friction at work, and that friction comes from all that bean counting and all that, those small things that don't matter that we've been trained to focus on as the way to work in modern culture, that can help alleviate burnout. It's focusing on the whole individual, like both of you had said, and just reminding everyone we're working on things, like I said, that are centuries old and centuries old problems, and we're not going to solve them with short-term thinking and short-term transactional box checking, right? Let's think about the goals that we want to reach, and remember that this is a marathon, not a sprint.
It's super relevant. Like our next LinkedIn Live is focusing in on how to measure nonprofit success beyond dollars. And I think this actually feeds into this same thing when we're talking about our internal teams as well, right? It's so nice to be able to transactionally check a box that says, got $1 million major gift, did that, we're all looking for clear hours put in, all of those things. But I think the shift really does make a difference. And even her first question, you said ambassadors, Jemima, and I think that is so true, because if we think, and I'm sure most leaders are aware of this in the sector, there are nonprofit Facebook groups where you are getting slammed if you are not doing a good job with your people. They're rampant and they are talking about it, right? And so either your own team is your best ambassadors, or potentially they are your absolute worst critics out there in the world, not being maybe overtly public about it, but people know. And I think that vibe, that energy, that positivity of someone who gets to go to a cultural event, comes back to their work and is like ready to go again, and so thankful they had that opportunity to rejuvenate and come back. It's real, right? And you can see it in action out in the world when teams don't get that as their work culture, for sure. I always, those groups are a little terrifying sometimes, but they're huge. And thousands of people in them, right? It's a real thing. And Emily Hicks Rotella in the comments, it's a huge block, but brilliance here too about, hustle and sustainability being very different than burnout and self-care, because they are kind of two discussions. I think there's a link between the two. When we push hustle, we get burnout, right? And maybe sustainability and self-care are somehow, more connected as well. I'm going to start out the next question, and I know it's already, holy cow, we're 30 minutes in. I don't know. You guys are saying such brilliant things. I'm going to have to write it all down afterwards. If people have questions as well, we're going to leave some time for questions at the end. So please jump in if you have questions, comments for these awesome panelists. We're going to move forward to this one because I think you guys gave us some great ways for leaders to already challenge the mindset. So I'm going to move forward a little bit in time, but I am going to throw this one to Andrew first, if that's okay. The really big thing that I know people are going to want to hear from here is, flexible work arrangements and mental health resources are often cited as solutions. But, how do you see this actually working in real life and helping us move away from hustle? But also, how do we get buy-in? And that buy-in's not even just necessarily from you as the leader or your team, but there's also boards, there's stakeholders, there's potentially, donors with big opinions. Like, how do we get that buy-in to move away from hustle?
Yeah, this is I'm largely going to bow to this one because, as I said, context and circumstances matter so much, and ours are super, super fortunate in this respect, right? So for one thing, we are a fiscally sponsored project, right? So we have another organization that has C3 status that provides sort of back-end services and confers their CC status on us. So as a legal entity, right, in exchange for a fee, percentage of the revenue that we pull in, So that has there are two implications of that. One is this organization, which was my last employer, right before we started EmbraceRace, is completely aligned in how we want to do work and what kind of culture we want to establish. And that was actually a big reason for us choosing them as a fiscal sponsor to begin with. And second, they're also, right, their legal board, I mean, their governing board is our governing board officially. In practice, they have very little to do with us, right? So until recently, now we have a steering committee that's about to start up, but really for the first 8 years, we effectively didn't have a board, right? So there wasn't someone to, oversee and object or anything like that. Now that we have a steering committee, the members of that steering committee are chosen in part because they, again, completely support, again, these cultural dimensions of what we're trying to do. The only other thing I'll say, and this is very personal, maybe more than organizational, although I think certainly Melissa would agree and others would too. I have been in organizations, I think I said this at the outset, I've always worked in nonprofits, always worked in social justice nonprofits, and have worked for organizations that did amazing work and said amazing things that they absolutely did not observe, right, internally. And that is devastating to me. And it was clear to Melissa and me that if and when we started an organization, as we did, that we would not be, right? I mean, we would give serious attention to living our values internally as well as externally. And again, not to say that it is aspirational, but we take it very seriously. And then related to that, part of the reason that makes sense for us is this is the work, right?
Yes.
When we say, our particular mission and so on, the implications of that go beyond, right, the specific things that we do or even the specific area in which we work. This, how we treat each other in this organization, the relationships we build with partners, we have a set of commitments, right, that other people call values. And one of them, for example, is specifically about building equitable relationships. And if we are not being fair and equitable in others, right, the terms under which we offer partnerships, we're monitoring that. And we want to be held to account for that, both ourselves and by the partner. So all to say, this is part of the work. It's not some, would be nice to have if also you were decent to your people, right? No, this is part of the work. And so that helps us take it seriously to realize that.
I think that's fantastic. Sebastian, what would you add to this buy-in? I know this is very much a part of your culture now. In getting to this spot, what were maybe some of the steps along the way for Trees Water people?
Repetition, modeling it, modeling behavior that you want to see and you want people comfortable with. We operate in a very different way than most organizations that people come from and work cultures that people come from. And so it does take time. When we implemented kind of unlimited vacation, if you will, or limited paid time off, it took a while for people to start taking advantage of it and believing us, right? That we were actually serious about it. We implemented a couple of things. One fun one is, dear God, during COVID, when everyone was stuck in their houses and at their computers all day and not taking enough breaks, we said, drop everything and go outside. Damn it. That's a tip of the hat to Jemima's, taking a walk policy. Just get out of the office and step away from the computer and step away from the work. Just kind of recenter, check in with yourself. No one's keeping track of your hours. You're not clocking in and clocking out. We also made sure that everyone understood that it's peer accountability. When you take time off, make sure that your people are okay on your team, the people around you, make sure that things are covered. It's not because we're looking down and making sure that all of the stuff, that you're supposed to be doing is going to get done, but, don't leave your people hanging and form stronger team partnerships. Another thing that we do is we started implementing OKRs, objectives and key results, but on a 6-month horizon. And so we do a lot of work to set goals for 6 months at a time. And really, it's not the plans that are important that come out of that, and everything that kind of builds down into the tasks and the everyday to-dos. But it's really the process of kind of focusing 6 months out, thinking about where we need to be and what we need to be focused on, and having those conversations of how we're going to get there, setting that, and then working towards it, right? And then checking in along the way. But having those check-in times that aren't at every staff meeting. Well, how many conversations have you had? How many deals did you close? How many X, Y, Z did you build, or what did you do? How many things did you do per dollar, which is a common thing that funders want to know. It's how much closer did we get to our objectives? Where are the gaps? Where do you need support? And do we need to push this into the next 6-month period? We don't expect you to accomplish everything that we set out, because we're thinking big, we're setting long targets, and we're setting stretch goals, right? But know that these are team goals, right? They're not individual goals, and not everything's going to fall apart if you don't meet your specific objectives. But we should be moving towards the goals that we have as a team, because that helps the organization move forward to the goals that we have as an organization.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's really helpful. And again, I love that you said long timeframes and the word big goals at the same time, because I think so often people feel like they can only kind of have like, oh, hey, we've got big goals of what our nonprofit's going to do. And I think, there's a whole, I don't know if you guys can see this commentary chat happening here. Love this. Rebecca and Dan and Emily are going back about the terminology of what hustle means. And, I very much kind of personally from my end, as someone in a startup, I'm a gal in a very techie kind of, all the startups I'm talking to are dudes, and it's not my world at all. And I love working hard. I'm an elder millennial. I fit all of the horrible meme boxes for what that means. Absolutely. I can totally own that. And I think I see often hustle in startups, and that startup world is often very reflected into the nonprofit world. That scrappiness, you got to be gritty. You're going to do things on small budgets. You're going to make it happen in the timelines it needs to happen. Kind of somehow that startup and nonprofits being kind of similar and different than like a bigger for-profit, they kind of got tied a little bit together. So I think that's partly where I came with this, like this work culture being kind of onto this hustle versus sustainability. And these guys are doing an amazing job talking this through over here on the side, which I love. And, but I do love that you're looking onto the horizon, and these big goals don't have to be completed. Right. And yes, maybe nonprofits, or many of them, exist to solve a huge need in the world. And the best case scenario is one day your organization is not needed. But there is the acknowledgement that maybe it should take 20 years to get to that goal. Maybe that is the best case scenario for both the team and for the actual success of that happening, right? Like maybe if we tried to do it in 15, the whole thing blows up. You can't get the buy-in, right? Like no one wants to do it in 15. So I really like, Sebastian, how your team is looking at that. I think that's a really cool way to frame that. Jemima, what would you add to this? How are you getting buy-in in a very unique, at higher education level? I love this.
Yeah, higher education is one element of it. I do want to just go back to that hustle term a little bit on the New York City element or side of things, in that the hustle here isn't and can be mission related, like you said, like the desperation of some of the causes that we're supporting. I belong to a couple of groups here in nonprofit groups in New York City that have very different kinds of missions than in the community than we do as a university, where we're educating students. But the hustle piece for me also comes about with donors and with expectations from those who are in the corporate space. So I do think for me, there's a part of, you just mentioned the startup environment, and it's scrappy and it's messy and we get it done, whatever hour it needs to be. There's an element of that at the highest levels of some of the big corporations and the big, the expectations. Now they have resources off the charts next to what we do, and interns and juniors and everything else to kind of make this stuff happen. And we in New York City, particularly at a lot of the nonprofits across the board that we sit in, we work in partnership. And I really do think it is a donor institution partnership between how they give and what their money impacts at each organization. But we often I'm finding having better conversations with donors about how we work inside and actually asking them questions. I'd love to leave that kind of as one of the things that I have learned more and more, and I'm really digging into myself here at Fordham, is asking better questions. And just, I know it lives on LinkedIn a lot, lots of people say it, but really getting out there and asking them how they do their work, what it is that they find sustainable in the work that your donors do, or the other work that where else they give, how else they're a part of their communities, and that element then kind of turns over back, keeps coming back and forward into your nonprofit culture. And I think it really influences then that point you just asked, how do we get buy-in here? Well, if I can take back to one of my bosses, well, I talked to a donor and they work with a church and they work with another school and they work with this and that, and that's how they do it. Could we try it? I'm happy to, make introductions. We can collaborate together. The Nonprofit Hive has that wonderful ability to kind of put different kinds of places together, but trying to do it more really internally and, kind of figure out who we are right here as well. So I think that is, for me, part of moving away from the hustle, trying to move away from the silos of like, this is how we've all done it before, or this is how these organizations do it, and see it as a holistic picture for our organizations to work together with donors and other organizations in support.
That's fantastic. You guys are we're already over time, which I was like, oh, we'll have tons of time to get through all this. No, you guys are all saying so many brilliant, thoughtful things. The comments are on fire over here. I'm going to have to look back through them. I didn't even get to follow along with them. There is a beautiful question. This is going to be our last thing, because I know our panelists have been lovely and given so much generosity of their time. If everyone could say, what tools do you use at your nonprofit to set and work towards long-term goals? Like, does anybody have a tool? Like, Sebastian, are you guys using a tool for something like that? That's the question that's come up here from the audience.
Well, I already mentioned OKRs, but I really think that the secret sauce for us is really increasing the number of trust-based relationships we have with our funders. What does that mean? It means recruiting funders as partners, giving them that long view, and enrolling them in that long view, inspiring them and compelling them to join you as a long-term, multi-year supporting partner, because we got this, right? We understand the work, we know the communities, we have the relationships, we're building towards things that we may not even see accomplished in our lifetime. But if we leave the right things in place, we can, have consequential impacts. To Jemima's point of, you've been at eight jobs in your career, and that, is a great way to kind of grow personally. But, we work with communities that are very place-based and have been there for centuries and millennia, and will hopefully be there in centuries and millennia from now. A typical U.S. career or Western career lasts 40 to 45 years. That's a blip, right? 4 years thinking of political cycles is a blip. And we really have to think longer term than that. So the better we can do about framing our work in terms of the long-term impacts that we're trying to create. And we speak to this in our film, In the Right Hands, which is at twp.org/trust, shameless plug. But it's all from the perspective of our funders that have taken that step and said, rather than, pushing organizations to respond to our needs, we're listening to the needs of the communities and the organizations and backing their play.
Mm-hmm. I love that. Well, I don't want to hold you guys up any further, because this was so generous. All of you gave so much of your time. The thoughtfulness of these answers, your very diverse backgrounds and perspectives. And this is what I love about nonprofit and what I've learned from Hive Chats. There is so many cool organizations doing incredible work out in the world. And here's 3 individuals working at 3 of them. So I love that. We are going to tag you guys all in. People, I know Sebastian and Jemima, LinkedIn active. Andrew, you need to be LinkedIn active, but you are not currently. So instead, you should follow EmbraceRace on Instagram and Facebook, because they put out incredible material. Love all that they do. And we are going to create an article out of this, all the insights, and share it with all of you afterwards. But, thank you, the 3 of you, just absolutely fantastic. And just love what you brought to this. Now I'm going to have to find a different word than hustle, because everybody is like, having a background chat here. And I totally appreciate it because we need to think about this. And I think it's conversations worth having, right, in this sector to talk about it, because otherwise things won't change if we don't start like bringing these conversations to the table.
And
So
I have to give some big love to Seth Giamonco, who is in the chat. And ModLab, his organization, has been instrumental for 6-7 years in getting our material, in providing the face and organization of our material online.
he is fantastic. He was one of our original Hive members, and he was like, you got to meet my friend Andrew. He's fantastic, right? So like, I think that's what I love. The Hive community just kind of brings all these incredible humans together. And thank you all for coming and doing this with us. Thank you to everybody in the audience. You've been amazing. And, much
Thanks to Tasha.
Yeah, thank you, Tasha, for inviting us.
This is fun for me, guys. This is like the best every time I get to do one of these. So
we love it too. Thank you.
Thank you. Good to meet you, Jemima and Sebastian.